This is Allison Thompson, Director at Marshall Public Library, and today is Thursday, January 14th, 2016, and I have the pleasure of being here with Mr. Warren Strohm at the library. And today, this is kind of a second installment of a previous interview, and I think that we're going to pick up kind of where we left off. Is that correct, Warren, with about elementary age?
Yes.
So I'll
yes,
go ahead and let you pick up where we left off.
That's fine, Allison. I have had a little anxiety putting this thing together, but once I got into it, Allison, I made myself some notes, which I couldn't do without those, I don't believe. But once I got into this, especially just yesterday, I was reliving some good times in my life, I guess.
That's great.
It got to be fun.
Good, good.
I really couldn't hardly believe it, but it got to be fun. And so this morning I'm going to start about the time I started to grade school. This was been in 1932, believe it or not. Before that time, of course, we lived down at just about a mile west of Snyder on the gravel road. The grade school was about a quarter of a mile south on the east side of the railroad track, which that railroad track was active back then. It had especially in the wintertime, it had numerous freight trains coming loaded with coal, and that section of the track there for a couple miles or more, it's an incline up from down the West Union area, and they would have those engines loaded at the point where they were using all the huff and puff they had. Of course, they were steam at that time, but and a lot of times they were just going at a speed of about what you would walk going past the schoolhouse there or down, and it wasn't uncommon at all. And of course, they were about all the same. The trains were all they were coal cars. Most of them were lump coal. A lot of them, but there was some just over coal going in Chicago, I guess. And it was it was interesting, I guess. I probably shouldn't tell this, but anyhow, we had our family lived just to the south of the grade school there, and things were tough back then. But he was mostly interested in keeping his family warm. He would jump aboard those coal trains coming north, and if he could find one with big chunks on it, those chunks would accidentally roll off the side of the car with his help, and then he would come back after the train was gone with the coal back and pick those up. And I didn't fault him a bit if you looked at the whole picture, because his family needed something to keep him warm, and he probably did not have the funds to buy that coal. So he borrowed some. Let's put it that way.
I don't think they missed it.
No, I don't think so. Prior to 1932, I don't remember a lot in my that age, but my dad, we lived on the 40-acre farm, but it was mostly there was about 25 acres of pasture or level ground, so to speak. The rest of it was all woods. So he did not till it as such, raising corn and wheat. There was no soybeans back then. But we had quite a bit of livestock from time to time. And in the 20s, I never did check to see exactly what time, but in the 1920s, the state of Illinois relocated Route 1 from the point there at Ernest, where it comes south and headed towards Crawford County. The old road, right on across the railroad track, and there were some speedy engines, and they didn't have crossing arms at that time. They were almost unheard of, and since for various reasons, the design people built a new road. They designed a new road on the west side of that railroad track, a brand new location and grading and rebuilt it. And my father, they had a yard set up at Ernest, which that's the first point that the road would curve and go straight south more or less. They had a yard set up there for mixing the concrete. They shipped, the way I remember the story, they would ship all that material in by rail car. And they had a yard there and where they'd unload it, and that's about all I know. I presume that they must have mixed there in the yard and hauled it out and dumped it along the right-of-way. And he worked along with that crew. That was in the late 30s probably in the 20s, in the late 20s when that happened. But the economy was fairly good in the 20s, as so I've been told, and that's nice to recall some times before I can remember that maybe families had enough to eat and so on and so forth and keep warm. Also, about that same time, my father had what we would call a 10.5 truck, I guess you'd say, and it had dual wheels on the back part, and of course, it would haul about 3-4 ton, I guess you'd say. And in the wintertime, he hauled a lot of coal for neighbors around in their area for their heating fuel. And most of that came from a mine, a shaft mine, just east of the Illinois and Indiana state line over here east of Marshall. Just as you go down that first hill, where the Stone Lodge Motel is, there was a mine there. I don't know exactly how deep it was, but of course in the wintertime the coal was very much in demand, and he would get up and go over there early and just wait in line until it was his turn to get coal loaded, and they would bring it. They could hoist it up that shaft with the cable, and then run it through a planter, and then but it was not uncommon for you have to sit there half a day maybe to get loaded. And somebody had built a little restaurant pretty close by. I maybe on Saturday or off days or before he even started school, I remember going with him a few times over to that, and that was quite for me as a young boy. That was quite amazing to see that way that coal was hoisted out of the ground. And he didn't have any trouble getting rid of it. He had times were pretty tough. Back then he could deliver the coal, sell it, and deliver it. He had some trouble getting paid for it. Of course, they were neighbors. He trusted them. Sometimes he trusted them a little too far. I suspect that he collected for most of it, but it just took a while because people didn't have funds. Along about that same time, or perhaps in the early 30s, as I remember, it was the first time that there was any public aid created. And we had a neighbor and his wife that lived there on about 20 acres. They were both getting up in years. And they got their first check, and it was $35 a month. And they were in seventh heaven. Because that was going to buy a lot of goodies, a lot of loaves of bread. Bread was about 10 cents a loaf, and so that helped a bunch. Mm-hmm. Also, about that same time, talking about bread, there were three of us children. I had two older sisters, and we lived. There was a little local store there at Snyder. First operators I remember was Lawrence Hollenbeck and his wife, I believe her name was, and they had bread and other groceries there in that store, and we lived just about a half a mile from there, straight west. One day. Our parents gave us, I think all three of us when it was on that, walking out to that store to get a loaf of bread. And they gave us a dime, a silver dime to carry, to put in our hand and go out there and get that bread. We got about half, 2/3 of the way, and one of us was playing around and we dropped that dime in what was a gravel road, and we looked and we looked and we looked and we could not find it. Oh, no. We were almost scared to go back home because we thought that we might get a little tanning on our rear ends. As I remember, our parents were not. They scolded us a little bit, but they did not punish us in that matter. The only thing they did, they said it was probably some of their fault too, that the next time we had the 10 cent dime, they wrapped it in a corner of a handkerchief and told us we should leave that handkerchief in one of our pockets until we got out there, which is what we did. That was a good lesson in economy, I think, for me, more or less. But let's get on down the road time-wise, maybe. I should. The grade school I attended was called Sherman Grade School. It was Clark County had a superintendent of schools back then, and Fred Heaven was that superintendent part of the time. That was Jack and Dean's father. He was he was school teacher, and then after he quit teaching, he was, I think, it was elected position. He was county superintendent of schools, and it was an occasion for our whole school body of students when we had a visitor. The superintendent of schools, because he always brought us some new books and some other things like that, and we enjoyed that. Also, we had I believe they had a school nurse that came occasionally to help us out with hygiene habits and that sort of thing. The Sherman School had one large room, of course, but it did have two side rooms, which was more or less should have been libraries, I guess you'd say, but we didn't have very many books to put in them. I don't know whether the building there as such was fairly new. I don't know whether the old schoolhouse years ago could have burned, which wasn't which was altogether probable. But that schoolhouse was constructed by the side of a little draw on the east side of the road that came down on the west side of the railroad track, and there's good drainage around it. Mr. Hollenbeck, Lawrence Hollenbeck, owned the property behind it, and he had some cattle barns back there because he raised quite a bit of cattle and had some feeder stock, and so when we were out playing in the playground, which was mostly behind the schoolhouse to the east, we could watch those cattle, and that was when we were waiting. It was our turn to bat. Mm-hmm. We had a ballpark there as such, and we knew nothing about a baseball diamond being set up with 3 bases. We just have 1 base, and it was quite a distance from home plate. It was our hope and our instruction was to hit that ball far enough that we could run to that first base, which was clear to the other end of the playground, a large tree. And if we were part way and the other team member got the ball, he didn't have to run and touch us, or he could do that, but if it was so desired, he would throw the ball at us. Oh. Yes, he would throw the ball, and of course some of the older boys that were big and stout, and when we were younger, they kind of delighted in throwing that ball and letting us know for sure when we got a hit, and we was out. Oh, shoot. Anyhow, let's see about in the late 20s or early 30s is when the big depression set in, and it affected the whole country. President Herbert Hoover was elected, I believe, in 28 until 32, and that's when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in, and I think he served 4 terms. But anyhow, President Hoover got the blame for the Depression. I mean, big time. Even though maybe it wasn't his fault, but that's when the Depression hit. And it wasn't funny. Maybe that was about the time that they finally came up with some old age assistance, and our neighbors got that $35 check a month, and they helped them out because there's nothing like that before that period of time. My first teacher in grade school was a gentleman by the name of Roy Dickerson. He was a part-time farmer, lived over towards Darwin, but he was big enough that there wasn't any of the older boys gave him too much trouble, or he would take him in one of those little rooms off the main schoolroom area, and they would get further instructions, which led them to not misbehave too often. But anyhow, it seems as though I don't know whether there was more than one student other than myself in the first grade. I'm sure there was possibly maybe 1 or 2 or 3, but the total attendance, as I remember, and I've got some pictures, which I didn't bring along. I should. I'll dig some of them out. I think we had upwards of 20 students, maybe altogether. But he, as I recall, and according to my mother, she taught me more about arithmetic and reading and writing, or writing particularly, than he did. He was my teacher for 4 years, the first grade through through 4. And anyhow, this has always been the toughest subject for me was spelling and pronunciation, and it still bothers me. My wife edited my notes that I made down that I created yesterday, and I showed them to her because I was proud of them. And she said, well, there's a lot of in there, but she said there's a lot of misspelled words. I said, I'll get there. I know how to pronounce them, I believe. So hopefully I won't get in that and lead you astray. Then the fifth year, we had a lady from West Union. Her name was let's see. Yeah. No, I'm a little wrong. She taught about the fifth, sixth grade. Yeah. We had a local man by the name of Clarence Collier. He was very dignified, but nice, a sharp dresser, and he was our teacher for my fifth year. And as I remember, I started taking a little more interest, or he was more interested in, I don't know which. But he left. When we left, he just taught 1 year, and he left West Union after that and went over to Toledo, Illinois, which he taught several years over there. In fact, he met his wife, a lady over there, young lady over there, and they were married, and he lived there. The story is, I guess, he lived happy ever after. My sixth grade was a lady that she and her husband lived down in West Union. What was her name? Gladys Tremaine was her name, and she was a good teacher. She kept pretty well controlled. Didn't let us all talk out loud at the same time, which that's one of the things. We could ask questions after we raised our hands and get permission for what we were supposed to do. And then that was the sixth grade. Through the sixth grade, the seventh and eighth was a lady that lived just about a mile from there. Her name was Newport, Florence Newport, and she taught seventh and eighth. And later, about the time I graduated, and from that eighth grade, which she was a teacher, was about the time that the school units were formed, and grade school kids were all brought into Marshall, and she taught at South School for a few years after that, which I think she probably did a nice job. I'd like to let's see. I touched on just a little bit a while ago, but the school building, well, I guess you'd say it was a 2-story in height, but it had a basement, which was a nice basement, and it made a place for us to play on real bad weather or rainy days. Our water system consisted, our fresh water consisted of one well out in front, dug well, with one hand pump in there that as kids we could pump and carry a bucket of water in for the class for our teacher, and or in the wintertime, I never will forget when the older boys, when it was cold, very cold, it was zero weather perhaps, and the older boys said we wasn't quite up to what was going on, but the older boys asked us younger ones to try to stick our tongue against the pump handle. And it was so cold that if you did that and left it there very long, it would almost freeze. And needless to say, we didn't try that more than once, because it wasn't funny, but it was funny to them. The schoolhouse was had one big stove in through the rear of the building, in the classroom, but the heat was very hard to regulate. Our room would get overheated. I think the furnace was fired with coal, and it would get overheated. So Mr. Dixon would just go over to the windows. There was big double windows on the east side, of course, to let in more light, I guess. And he would just pull one of those down up from the top. Well, it wasn't very long before all the heat was gone out of the building, and we would have to start all over. It seemed like, but I can remember if that particular incident. Cut her off. In the, I guess I've got everything on tape here that I had concerning my grade school time. So let's fast forward into high school, and I probably only got down a very small portion of the things that happened in high school, but it was in the fall of 1941 that Kenneth and I entered Marshall Township High School. His parents, I think along about that time, moved to Marshall here, and his father went to work at what we called at that time, it was out at the building is still standing. It's been the welding shop out right next to the railroad track on the Clarksville Road. If I'm not mistaken, I believe part of that at least is the original building where it had the cheese plant. There was pickup trucks with insulated bodies on them would go out through the country, and of course there was a lot of cattle, milk cows at that time, and they brought in to that cheese, what we called the cheese plant, the milk from the farmers, which was gave them low income, and they had some big stainless steel vats in there where they actually made cheese, and it wasn't uncommon for the workmen to put on rubber boots and get in those vats. So they were sanitized, I presume, and stir that milk until it and I don't know with heat or what, but it would turn into cheese. And I visited with Kenneth's dad out there a time or two, and it was quite amazing to me. Also, so he didn't, the district, the high school was, and rural grade schools became unused, and everybody came to Marshall. But the buses at that time the bus system was not set up yet, and so I'm just sure that happened. His family moved to town, and my family moved to town. My father got a political job on the state highway, which was very common in those days. Whichever political party was in power or had the governorship, held the governor over us, the state highway employees was of that same political party, and if the governorship changed, well, the workers changed. And my dad got a supervisor job where the state furnished him a car, and he was a supervisor all the way from West York clear up to Danville, and some west, east and west. So we moved to Marshall, and we lived right down here on Route 1, about 3 blocks down from the stop sign. And I walked to high school like everybody else did. But and my two older sisters rather, they were through school, of course, and it was. I'd like to concentrate on that just a little bit, but stop right there. One of my sisters was 2 years older than I, and the other was 4 years. Well, it was a general feeling in the Snyder community, and that girls of that age were not required to go to high school, and before the school bus system was set up, they had no way to. I mean, they had to furnish their own transportation getting there, and home, of course. So my 2 sisters didn't go to high school, and later on in the years, I could see what a great loss that to them that was. Because I was fortunate that I did go to 4 years high school, and then I went in service. But they got a job in restaurants and so on and so forth. But ever since that happened, I can certainly see the benefits that all the students in Marshall area, and of course other areas also, have the opportunity to attend the high school here and participate, and they don't worry a thing about how they're going to get to school or how they're going to get home, and that did not happen. Just the opposite happened to my 2 sisters, and they lost a lot of things, a lot of enjoyment, things in life, and that they would have gotten otherwise. But anyhow, let's see. Find out for sure where my notes is taking me. Here I am. Kenneth and I entered freshman as Marshall High School, and we were there was a term called green freshmen, and both of us fit right in that because we had not had the experience that the town kids had, and so we didn't take us long till we found a ways around that. We got it fit. After a few weeks or in our freshman year, we pretty well fit in, but we were fast learners, I think. And one of the things that happened in the summer of 1942 was that, of course, we were the age that we'd like to earn some money, and we started looking around. And Kenneth got a job here in Marshall at the Rio Brown service station, helping the Bill Crotty was the operator there, and he worked at that service station. But I went to work for my uncle Dan Schaefer, south of Marshall, about 5 miles on the farm, and I didn't get to town only by weekends. And of course, but entering high school, the 2 of us was the age where we started noticing the girls, I guess you'd say. And here Kenneth got a job where he was in town all the time, and he could he could holler at the girls or whistle at them or whatever. And here I was out in the country, where all I could see was horses. But I stayed with my aunt and uncle during the week and came back to Marshall and my home on the weekend. That was the summer of 1942, and my uncle and his oldest son was, I don't think he was married that time. They had one John Deere tractor, and the rest of the farming was done of course, with horses. And I learned quite a bit. I learned how to put the harness on and hitch them up and drive them and that sort of thing. And at the end of that, and my uncle was going to pay me a bucket, or did. He paid me $1.50 a day for every day that I worked. If we got rained out or too wet or too dry or whatever happened, we had everything kind of caught up. Why, I didn't get paid. But the end of the summer, when I didn't, he gave me my room and board, of course. At the end of the summer, he gave me a check for $60, and that was big money back in them days. In fact, I bought on down the road. I took that money and bought me some school clothes, and I made that stretch me. That money stretched till I printed through my second year of high school, the best I remember. But so, and then my second summer, I can't remember for sure what Kenneth did, but my father had the privilege of hiring some help on the highway if he so desired, and so he got me a job mainly riding with Fenn Fraker, who lived out east of town here, and he had one of the maintenance trucks that stayed at his house, and their plan was for have a second person ride with that truck, take care of anything that they needed to do, and I got my wages was 60 cents an hour, and I put my arithmetic together, and we would stop occasionally, and especially in hot weather, and get us a soda pop. Soda was cold soda was 5 cents a bottle, and I figured out real quickly if we stopped and we stayed there 10 minutes. We got back on the truck. I just broke even. I made 10 cents. I was making a penny a middle. So if I bought the soda, why, I just break even on that soda stop, but yet I got a cool drink. I don't, like I said, I'm not sure what Kenneth did that summer, but later that fall, he and I had an experience which stayed with me for a long time. My uncle sent us out to a cornfield with a team of wagons and a wagon, and we shucked corn out there by ourselves. That was on a Saturday after school started. I never will forget that. I don't think we overfilled the wagon, but we did have the experience of you had what they called a shucking peg that fastened on your hand, and you grabbed a hold of the ear and used that peg to knock open the shucks, to start getting the shucks off that ear, and because you wanted the ear in the wagon, but it wanted to be fairly clean of the shucks, because they were no value once to feed dogs or cattle. But I never will forget that. I think we were not overly fast at it, or didn't produce too big a load of corn. So I don't, best of my knowledge, my uncle did not hire us to do that again. we were probably pretty happy with that results. Let's see, the next summer. One thing that I remember, before that summer was over, state of Illinois had a small John Deere tractor with a mower permanently mounted on it, and the bar would raise with a hydraulic lever, hydraulic system. My dad, or Finn Frakerwan, whoever was my boss, on what we did that time, they put me on that tractor and started me down at the West York Junction, that's the farthest that we went south, along Route 1, and he started me mowing, and that's the middle of the summer, and I ended up mowing for 3 weeks on both sides of the highway to the ditch, from the ditch back to the fence. I mowed from West York Road, or the Camden line, clear to the Clark County line, which north of town is just south of Oliver a little bit. And I learned how to, if something hit some metal and knock a blade off that sickle, I learned how to put those on, or rivet them on. There was a few times I got stuck. Very simple. I had a chain or a heavy rope. I forget. It's probably a chain. I'd hook the chain on that tractor and take the other end out towards the highway, and I'd wait till a car or pickup truck, or maybe a bigger truck come along, and I flagged them down and asked them if they'd pull me out of the ditch. And fortunately, it didn't happen to me, but it did too several times, especially down here south of Snyder, down the Snyder Creek and so on. And that was quite an experience with me. And then in the summer of 1944, Kenneth and I went to work for a Marathon Pipeline Company out of Marshall, Illinois, and on maintenance crew. Of course, help was actually hard to find in those days. All able-bodied people had been drafted in the service, so we were what, 16-year-olds, I guess you'd say, 16 or going on 17, and they put us to work. We hired in over at Marathon Martinsville one morning, and they sent us clear over in Indiana. Best I remember, I had my parents' car and a four-door Plymouth, and we drove over there. It was north of, just south of Rockville, Indiana. We got there was a little town called Catlin, Indiana, and Marshville had a pumping station, and that's the next pumping station on that pipeline's route to pump that crude oil on through the pipe to the next stop. So they sent us over there to Catlin. We got there about noon, give or take. The boss or the foreman put us to work that afternoon with two shovels, helping unload railroad cars of coal, and they've dumped them. They had an big incline there, so they would dump the coal and push that coal down over the hill by hand. So by the time we had done that, we had our work clothes on, but by the time that we worked that whole afternoon on the coal pile, we kind of showed it. And we didn't even have a place to stay for that night. That was on a Monday, and there was nothing, scarcely, there's only a few houses in Catlin. So fortunately, in that power plant over there, which was a coal-fired steam, they had a hot water system, and they had a shower facilities. So Kenneth and I took a shower and headed for Rockville to find a place to stay that night. I guess we were very fortunate in the fact that we got to Rockville, and Route 36 goes east and west through Rockville. That's the main street. We were driving east and west went east on that main street, and lo and behold, what we see out was a sign says sleeping rooms for rent. And we stopped, and they were up. There was upstairs. We had the whole upstairs of this house to ourselves, and so we stayed there that whole summer. We came back to Marshall in the weekends and seen our girlfriends, and then we were out of town all week. But I forget exactly what wages we draw, but I think it was about $1.60 or 70 cents, which that wasn't too bad in those times. What our work consisted of, there was 2 or 3 pipelines run, like I said, underground through that area that were there from Martinsville, and the project one on east. We actually dug those pipelines up by hand and dug underneath them, so they had a gasoline-powered cleaner that cleaned that pipe, a steel pipe, and then the workmen, the other people, actually coated that pipe and wrapped it in with tar paper. That was part of their maintenance program. Now, if there was a leak, which I don't recall, we were on a very serious leak, but of course we was available to get on that call 24 hours a day, but I don't think we ever got called out. But we did. It wasn't anything that serious. But there was about 6 of us, I think, in their crew over there, and we had a lot of fun and learned a lot of quite a bit of. We got an education of that along those lines that summer, and it was. We found out. Well, actually, while we were in that summer, this was an older couple that we rented this house from, but we found out after we was there just a very short time that they had 2 daughters that lived there also, and that made it a short summer. Although they were a little older than us, but they were nice and friendly, and so was our parents, and that was a great experience. Then that was 1944. In 1945, we were granted a short deferment. I was, from the time we reached 18 until the end of high school year, selective service gave us a deferment until we got out of school. And then in June of 45, there was 35 young men from Marion Clark County, got on the train down here east edge of town where the depot was, and we went to Chicago for physical examination. Well, a few of them didn't pass, most of us did. Kenneth and I both passed, so we came back. They allowed us to come back, and we stayed. They gave us 30 days to get any of our personal business taken care of. On the 13th of July, which was a Friday the 13th, and we rode our train in on the day before, I guess, on the 13th. We took the step forward there in the headquarters and joined the armies. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Kenneth joined the Navy, and I served a year and a half, and that was a big experience too. Mm-hmm. Perhaps I'll make myself a few notes, and I'll talk about that the next time I come by. Allison, okay. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea.
Have you enjoyed?
I have enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much for taking the time to jot down these memories. It's very fascinating to me.
Well, fortunately, I guess the good Lord gave me pretty good memory, except I can't remember people's names. I've seen I've seen yesterday, perhaps, mm-hmm. which I guess is pretty common. If I live about 6 more weeks, I'm going to have a birthday in March, and I will have completed 89 years.
That's great.
And I'm going to go for some more.
That's right. That's right. Well, you have more to tell me, so you have to.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you. Bye. As I recall, and my note says I was either in the 4th or 5th grade. There was a new family moved into the school district, and they had there's 2 children in the family. Of course, their parents, and they lived in the southern part of the district. And one day, some of the older boys, or this new student, was in school, and I'd never seen him before. And some of the older boys had talked to him and told him to have nothing to do with me for some reason, and that made me pretty unhappy at that time. Needless to say, thank goodness, that situation didn't last very long, because I got acquainted with him and his sister. His name was Kenneth Lau, and her name was Hilda. Hilda's still living. She married a Jones. Her name is Jones. She lives on North 8th Street. Unfortunately, Kenneth is not living. He's deceased 3-4 years ago. But anyhow, Kenneth Lau and I became friends, and we were friends all the rest of our days. Our grade school and high school days we were 2 of the best friends that I can ever remember in my life. And unfortunately, I think he contracted respiratory disease. It turned into pneumonia, and he didn't live through it. But that's how we met, and I was in grade school. Then I remember one incident in the 7th or 8th grade. Of course, me and some of the other boys in the family, we thought we was getting pretty well. We were upper grades. We were grade people there, and we'd pull a trick on our teacher. So she was outside, so we found us a rope, and one of us stood on one side of the hallway there, the entrance, and one the other. And she came in. I spoke up and I told her that I wanted her to jump the rope to get in the classroom. Well, she didn't take that very kindly, and she said, "Warren, I'm a little bit surprised at you. I'm not going to jump that rope for you, and if you don't straighten up, I'm going to report this to your parents. How you were acting today." And I said, "Oh, Mrs. Newport," I said, "please don't do that. I'm sorry I did it, and I won't do it again." that's one of the that's only the few times I can remember I got myself in a little bit of hot water, and maybe I got out of it. I hope that I did. My grade school period of time, we lived just about a half a mile west of Snyder, and Kenneth, my friend, he lived on the next gravel road south, which was about another mile. Well, he had a pony at his little farm, and I had asked we had cows and hogs, but no horses or ponies. And so I spent a lot of time down at Kenneth's house, riding. We'd play with this and ride his pony, which is all right with him. We had a lot of fun doing that. And it was a lot closer for me to just walk to his house down through the country. So from my house was just nothing but open field and some pasture ground, and I had to cross a creek, so the Snyder Creek, to get there, and then up through the bottomland. But I was not. I took that trip numerous times, and I guess my parents were. My mother was not too excited. I always showed up back home, with no too much wear and tear, but today some kids would probably do that, and if today's economy, I'd probably be lazy too. I'd want my parents to take me down there, or I'd ride a bicycle perhaps. But I've seen a lot of vacant ground. That time it wasn't very productive in that mile.